In the first video introducing class and instances, I made a little comment about the public keyword that was present in the definition of my class, asking you not to worry about it for the moment. I told you I would talk about it in the next video, and now is the time to focus on it, this little public keyword. I guess you already have a rough idea of what it means, if not an exact understanding of the problem, because I already introduced this during the PHP Piscine. And indeed, the notion isn't hard to guess. Let's open the declaration of our sample class, in which we will find again our little public keyword, and of course its buddy, the private keyword. So what does it mean? Public and private will allow me to control the encapsulation of the members of our class, meaning the attributes and the member functions that will only be visible from inside the class or from the outside. When you define public functions or attributes, it will be possible to access them from inside the class, but from outside the class as well. However, when we declare private attributes or functions, they will only be accessible from the inside of the class. These member attributes and functions are perfectly invisible and inaccessible from outside the class. By the way, if you try to do it, the code won't compile. This will grant a quite powerful and interesting control on the structure and the design of your classes, as you'll be able to choose what part of your class you give the user access to, and what you choose to keep private inside your class. To hide the implementation details of your class and to have visible from the outside just the part that will be useful to your user. The syntax is very simple. You use the little private or public keyword followed by a colon, and everything underneath will be either private or public, depending on where you are. Here you can see what I choose to place in the public section of the constructor and destructor of my class, just because it's practical to be able to construct and deconstruct my class. Imagine if I had my constructor or my destructor in the private section. I'd be in trouble quickly. I'm saying this, but note that in some cases, and we'll talk about that later, it'll make a lot of sense to place a constructor in the private section. We'll get back to this. These are more advanced notions. For now, it should make sense to you, and it does make sense, to keep the constructor and the destructor in the public section of your class. Also note that I'm declaring here an attribute of the integer type, what I name public foo, which will be visible from inside and outside my class. In the same way, my public bar bracket member function will be usable and visible from inside and outside my class. Then I define a section of my declaration that will be private, meaning that everything underneath will be internal to my class. Particularly here, an integer attribute that I named _private foo, that will be visible and usable only from inside my class. In the same way, for the _private bar bracket member function, you understand how it works. Another little note on my coding convention. It's a good idea to use underscore prefix for all your private identifiers. You don't have to, it's just a convention. This one happens to be very common. It doesn't matter whether you choose to place the underscore before or after the identifier. You do as you want. You'll choose what you prefer. I advise you to go check on the internet how it's done so you can choose a style you will like. But make sure that when we look at any line of your C++ code, we know immediately whether we're dealing with a public or private member. It's very practical later on to dive into your code or even read someone else's code. When defining these attributes and functions, the functions more particularly, the syntax won't be complicated. There's nothing new. Whether they are private or public, we'll define them the same way. Here, _private bar brackets and public bar brackets, we can see the little underscore allowing to see at first sight that we're dealing with a private member function. Anyway, I added a few examples that will allow us to illustrate. The fact that in my constructor, I may use public foo brackets or underscore private foo brackets, as well as public bar brackets and underscore private bar brackets, just because I'm in the code of my constructor. So it's a member function of my class. Then I may use the private member attributes and functions. We'll see in a moment in the code of the main brackets that it's not possible to do the opposite. Nothing particular here, just a little output so we can check on the display. Now let's open our main brackets to see what we can do from outside the class. Here I instantiate my sample class. So we made a call to our constructor here. All the code we reviewed together was executed. And here I'll do an assignment on the public foo attribute to set it to the value 42. So no problem here. Remember, public foo brackets was declared as public. So I'm able to access it from outside my class. In the same way, I may call my public bar bracket member function, since it's been defined and even declared as public, so I have access to it. But as you can see in the commented lines, we'll experiment it in a moment. Try to access a private member attribute or function, and it just won't compile. Let's try all this. Compiling. Executing. I can see that I was able to use public foo brackets for my constructor. I was able to use underscore private foo for my constructor. I was able to call the member functions public bar brackets and private bar brackets for my constructor. No problem. Whether they are public or private, I can access them. From the outside, I was able to use my private attribute, public foo, to assign it the value 42. But I was also able to use my member function, public bar brackets, to make outputs on the screen. Let's try to uncomment these lines. The one saying I want to do an assignment on a private attribute and call a private function. What will our friend G++, the compiler, say? Well, basically, he's telling me to go to hell. As it reads here, the underscore private foo attribute is private, therefore I can't use it. Same for the underscore private bar bracket member function. I can't use it. Nothing complicated here. Please be careful when setting your private and public member attributes and functions. Make sure you expose outside your class only the parts that will be useful to the user. And make sure you keep internal private as much as possible. All the implementation details that will allow your class to work but have nothing to do with the user. A perfect daily life example would be the way your computer works. You don't care how it works when using it. All you want is for the commands you may access to actually work. How they work doesn't matter for the moment. The way your computer works inside is private, but the way it works outside, what is accessible to you, the public part, your shell, your mouse, etc., you have access to it, it's useful. Always make sure when designing a class to think about what you should keep internal and what you should expose outside. That's it. I'll let you meditate on this, and I will see you in the next video.